to our third day of this really inspiring Congress. I have the honor to moderate the first section, which is about language. And I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Matthias Heinz. He studied Roman and English philology at the universities of Heidelberg, Pavia, and Lyon 2. Following the state examination as a matrice in modern literature, he was awarded a PhD in 2003 for his thesis on textile prosody, a corpus-based study of textile Pacific prosodic patterns in Italian with an outlook on French. In 2011, he completed his habilitation at the University of Tübingen on syllable typology and loanword adaptation with special regard to Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian. Positions followed at the University of Jena and Chemnitz University of Technology, and since 2013 he holds the chair of Roman Studies at Paris-Laudron University of Salzburg and serve as Dean of the Faculty of Cultural Studies there since 2022, as far as I see. In between, he held a number of visiting lectureships, including the universities of Florence and Toronto. In 2016, Mr. Heinz was awarded the title of Socio Corrispondente Estero by the Accademia della Crusca. Dear Mr. Heinz, we are looking forward to your presentation of Italian loanwords in historical commercial terminology using the OIM database, which is an abbreviation of Osservatorio degli Italianismi nel Mondo, that stands for International Research Project of the Accademia della Crusca, Florence, in coordination with Luca Seriani from Roma La Sapienza. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And both of us will be speaking, presenting in English today, and I'll try to walk us through all the details rather quickly. I hope so. So this morning, thanks also not only to a colleague, Anja Amend-Traut, but to Stefania Gialdroni, Francesca Fusco, and all the organizers who have brought us here. It's really an honor to be in this picturesque venue in spite of the heat. And we'll be focusing on language aspects of what has been described yesterday as a crossroads of interdisciplinary perspectives from law, history, language, and so on. So I'm briefly going to speak, make some introductory remarks. On phenomena of borrowing in language and the role of Italian as a donor language. Then this project that has already been mentioned, the domain of digital lexicography and language contact loanwords in the OIM project, and then take a look at some of the, I call them winding paths of loanword migration. The word history could be described as a kind of a trajectory or a migration path, rather, with some examples from commercial terminology stemming from our database. It is interesting to note from a linguistic point of view that language contact, and not only language contact presupposes cultural contact, commercial relations, and so on, for languages and language communities, speakers to come into contact, to note the relevance of the more peripheral areas of the language system, which come into play in what in German has been called historische Einzelsprachen, and Eugenio Cosserio called single language systems historische Einzelsprachen, it is mainly the lexicon that is most permeable to outside influences. It can absorb influences from other languages and from the real world more readily than, say, the syntax or the grammar proper of a language. And so in all the languages of the world we have a variety of loan phenomena, loan words, Fremdwörter, you would say in German, this kind of phenomena. Lehnwörter, actually, and Fremdwörter, you could make a difference, which is not made in all languages. Historically, Italian is and has been, I think that is known to everybody, an important contact language of many languages all over the world. It is the source of a great variety of so-called Italianisms, both in specialized sectors of the lexicon like art, architecture, music. That is what comes to mind first. Of course, all the domain of gastronomic terms, food, wine, and so on, but also finance, trade, law, and actually another domain that is often forgotten is historical military terminology and architecture, where Italian is one of the top donor languages. And some Italians have, of course, migrated, if you want to say, so in the general vocabulary of other languages. So we of course have specialized resources, inventories of those loan words, loan word dictionaries that document lexical influences from other languages. And we have a new type of those inventories of borrowings or loan words now that are online, readable, machine readable, that are more databases than actual dictionaries, that allow us to study and research the influence of those borrowings in specific languages. And so cross-linguistic comparison about the results of language contact and the specific factors of historical, cultural, linguistic contact can be traced. The Osservatorio degli italianismi nel mondo is an ongoing international project hosted, as has been said before, by the Accademia della Crusca, in order to have a documentation of the lexical impact, the impact Italian has had as a donor language worldwide. I feel honored to speak here in presence of the honorary president of the Accademia della Crusca, Nicoletta Maraschi. As we will see, she was it was under her presidency that this project has been has seen the light and has been promoted. And that is really a lasting merit of the Accademia and of Professor Maraschi. So just a brief view, but we can probably skip some of that. View on terminology, prestito, Entlehnung, Lehnwort, loan word, borrowing. We see that both English, German, Italian, other languages have different terms to describe similar phenomena. We could say that the Italian term prestito, loan, designates both the general phenomenon of interference as a process of reproduction of foreign linguistic elements, as well as any single or multi-word lexical unit that reproduces in its form and in its specific meaning a given foreign pattern. So it's imitation. It's not always the exact copy or a cult, what we call a cult. Sometimes it's just the imitation of a pattern, a linguistic pattern, structural pattern from another language, or sometimes it's only the semantics. For us, we sometimes use words from our own language, but adopt a new sense. And likewise, I should read that in Italian because it's un italianismo è un prestito dall'italiano a un'altra lingua, oltre a prestiti veri e propri, diretti e indiretti, si considerano anche le induzioni, i calchi e lo pseudo-prestito. So Italianism is a borrowing to another language, and there are different types, and I leave it to you to read that. So there can be direct and indirect borrowing, and all kinds of morphological, semantic borrowings, and also pseudo loan words or borrowings. And as for Italian, Italianism would cover a broad range of phenomena, very diverse. So there are the classical, typical monomorphemic loan words that consist just of one word with different degrees of there's a typo, grammatical adaptation, morphological borrowing, and so on. So we have the pervasive greeting formula that has established itself as an informal greeting, ciao, in many languages of the world. It actually comes from Venetian dialect. It was ciao. It's like servus. And it passed on to the Italian common language, ciao, and from there it traveled to many languages. In our database we have it documented in English, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Hungarian, but also further languages. But there are also sometimes what we linguists call multi-word units, so the kinds of sequences that consist of several lexical items, dolce vita, dolce far niente. There are some stereotypes thrust in those, enclosed in these words, which we have in also, which we know of in different languages. And sometimes it's just an ending, a morphological element like issimo, which has been used a lot in the language of marketing, publicity. Affairissimo in French, you can find chicissimo, vielfaltissimo, that was a publicity, a marketing campaign by Chibo for coffee machines, vielfaltissimo. So you would take a noun, a German noun, as a base and just add the morphological ending, which does not really add something of a superlative, but rather something Italian sounding and giving the impression of Italian gusto and simply kind of a marketing device. But also interesting cases like maneggiare in Italian, that has spawned the English form to manage, but not well, manage has also in English has this influence from Old French ménager, ménagère, and so on, but maneggiare is a 16th century special term for governing a horse, and it became the basis for management, and an English loan word that is now has spread to, as an internationalism, to probably all written languages of the world. So in Italian you would call this cavallo di ritorno. It is when a word migrates, is adopted in another language as a loan word, and then it comes back, because of course you have management, manager as loan words in Italian. And sometimes it's more proverbial phrases, a famous sentence attributed to Galileo Galilei, e pur si muove, which in German has been translated in traditional, educated German, it would be recognized, und sie bewegt sich doch. Pseudoloans, picobello in German is such a case, where the peak element coming from pück, from Low German, spoken in the north. Pück means neat. And picobello is something done in an orderly fashion, very neatly, very accurately. Or hybrid formations, frappuccino would be one such case where you blend, where you mix actual Italian elements with something, in this case it's frappé, but it's not a word of the Italian language, but it has been coined by a famous coffee roaster from the United States. And you can also, but we'll probably not have time to go into these linguistic details, classify those Italianisms, those loan words in general, according to their lexical frequency, the frequency of occurrence, and their weight according to different criteria. Luca Seriani, who sadly passed away in 2022, we had been directing this project together from 2014. And so now it's mainly Lucilla Pizzoli and Marco Biffi from Rome and Florence who are in this with me, and we have a large work group, we'll see that. But so there can be some factors that show that loan words have become very entrenched, very ingrained in the lexicon of another language. If you look at how the give and take balance between one level, donor language, and the recipient language, in this case Italian and other languages, Romance languages and so on. The prevalence between of the Italianisms in the basic fundamental lexicon, whether they just occur in some very specialized strata of the lexicon, or whether they have become part of the common core. That is the case in some, for example, in Romania, where you have many loan words in the core vocabulary, which is rare in other languages. Interjections, phraseological connectives, discourse markers, and so on. That is, and autonomous semantic developments of the loan words in the language. That shows that there has been a long and standing and intense language. So this OIM project stands, it's not the only one, but there are a few other projects with research endeavors that take this systematic approach to the lexical impact, the lexical footprint, you could say, of language in multiple contexts. And usually it's just the traditional loanword dictionary, like Anglicisms in French or something like that, and not a perspective of comparison. Actually, Manfred Görlach did such a more traditional dictionary of European Anglicisms, and there's a very interesting project for Nederlands, for Dutch. Nederlandse woorden, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, and that Uitleenwoordenbank. So it's a database, a bit like ours of loan words from Dutch in different, and Dutch, having been a colonial language, has quite a heritage of loan words in the world language. The Lehnwortportal Deutsch, we are cooperating closely with Mita Maya from the Institut für Deutsche Sprache, and there is ours. We started more or less the same time, and we invited each other and were in an exchange on how to do this. Osservando dell'italiano nel mondo. And you have, and I skipped that, of course, a great variety of recipient languages. They can be geographically remote and typologically close, like the American or Canadian variety of English or French that have some specific Italianisms, but of course they're not very far as language structure goes, but geographically they're far. But you also have Mandarin or Japanese that are really typologically, structurally very different languages and very remote, and still have adopted some loan words from Italian. So it all started with a traditional Dizionario di italianismi francese inglese tedesco in print, and it was published by the Accademia Crusca, which was then transformed into a first version of an online database in order to get a better way of accessing the data. Then we started around 2014 the idea of this observatory in order to document, reconstruct word history and so on. And I'm skipping a little bit of that because it's become very technical. So we've been able to significantly increase the number of different languages. We have collections of Italianisms in the database, of which we have collections in our database, but also the sheer number of loanwords. So it's more than 15,000 now. We started with about 9,000. We had about less than 5,000 Italian etymology, or the voci di partenza, we call them, the words, the Italian words which are at the basis of a loanword in another language, and it's more than 6,000 now. And we've even been able to document words that had no prior attestation in Italian lexicography before. So with Herbert Ernst Wiegand, the whole endeavor could be called an aktives polylaterales Sprachkontaktwörterbuch in this typology, very detailed typology of dictionary. It's an active and multilateral language contact dictionary, which allows for very, very refined online search. And now we have very recently, we have released we call it OIM 2.0, a new version. It was presented briefly at Tornata, at one of the public conferences of the Accademia Crusca, and this is what the website looks like now. And you can see from this map that we're really a very international work group now. It's like 60, 70 researchers in about 20 universities around Europe, and even one in China, in Canada, in the US, in Brazil. but that is very technical. I'll skip that. Those are the challenges for the technical lexicography to do, because behind the back end of the databases, of course, looks different, and you have to have. We had to build up the whole. That's interesting for the computational linguists. Whole XML-based relational database with all the menus in order to be able to insert the data, or the data, I should say, in order to visualize them for the user of the front end. And so you have a lot of historical etymological information, but you also have some new stuff. You have more spelling variants, grammatical. You have even the loanword pronunciation. We have the transcription, and where we have not, we're still creating some of the audio files, but usually there's an audio if you can even hear the word, the date, the year of first attestation, and if applicable, if we have a terminus antequem, if we know this is the last source where we find the word and then it becomes obsolete. That is something we have been trying to research very in much detail. So in order to be able to classify the loan words according to those that are obsolete, archaic in use, in current use, or just dialectal in use. So this is what the website looks like now, and we have also published single online dictionaries. Of course, you can break up such a database into single dictionaries. So we have the dizionario dell'italianisch nel portoghese, dizionario dell'italiano nel ungherese, catalano, and other languages. So you can have a single dictionary, or you can show all the different results, and you would do this way, and we'll just have. I will have to skip this. It's only a demo version I created in 2018-19, but I think it's promising, and we have collected also the data when inserting the data in the back end on dialectal origin of the language and a regionally diatopically restricted use of the word, in order to be able to create a map, in order to have an idea of how words, for example, this is the case of ciao from Venetian dialect, that in a way migrate, travel to other languages. This was Genoese, and for example, you have 7 terms from the terminology of shipbuilding that have gone exclusively and exist only in France, in French, and that stem from Genoese, or you have quite a few of them from Venice terminology, especially commercial terminology. And you, of course, what you see here is the movement that MICOLL, for example, is interested in, where they go not from Florence to, say, Hanover, from one standard language to the other, but via the dialect contact from Veneto to via Trentino, Friuli to Tyrol, and so on. So you have this kind of application. And of course, we shall have, in order to finish this walk through the OIM database, shall have a look at terms of trade, commerce. So what I did was we have about 3,385. I say about because that is changing. We're still inserting data, loan words from Italian, documented in German. German means different varieties of German, of course. German, the common language, but also the German variety of Austria, of Switzerland, and of South Tyrol, Alto Adige, because you have lots of Italianisms in the whole legal terminology that are exclusive to Alto Adige. And you get a little less than 300 commercial terms as for now, so it's always, because that number can change, there can be some some might be added, but it makes for quite a large number. Actually, so far the second largest semantic domain we have covered in the observatory is actually trade, finance, and many of them are also terms of legal value. Whereas music is by far, as for now, that is changing a little bit, but it will remain the most important domain, where Italian words have really made up the terminology, international terminology. And of course you have art, architecture, military, weaponry, but trade and finance is really, really extremely important. And I'll just finish by looking at some of those words, according not to the DFID, which I know MICOLL has used, but to our database, where you have some, in many cases, some more detail than DFID had. Let's take the example of accord, and that shows very well that in many times tracing the etymology, the migration path is very difficult, because of course accord in German as it stands would stem from French. Looks like accord, it's yes, well, and that is true, but it's not true for all of the terms, the senses, the terminological uses of the word, which has been shown by different studies. You can see that in the etymologische Wörterbuch by Wolfgang Pfeiffer and others, as it enters German for the first time in 1479, according to the attestations we have, in the sense of a contract, an agreement, and so on, in a more general sense. And then in 1619, we have this very precise legal term, nel diritto fallimentare accordo extragiudiziale tra debitori e creditori per evitare o porre fine al fallimento. In bankruptcy law, it would be an out-of-court agreement between debtors and creditors to avoid or terminate bankruptcy. And that is, at the beginning of the 17th century, what we have. Although accord from French was also, in the sense of agreement and so on, was already circulating in the varieties of German, although also in the original sense it came from Italian. And so you have to somehow account for these multiple origins. Take accordo in German, which looks more Italian. By 1506, we find in the sense of an alliance, a peaceful or economic agreement reached through negotiation, a treaty regulating the voluntary surrender of a besieged city, fortress, or a similar structure to the enemy. Whereas afterwards, accordo becomes a musical. We have different. It has different senses and nothing to do, and that the musical term would only go back to the 18th century. But that makes for a very intricate pattern of migration path. And of course, our philological work was to reconstruct that based both on the historical dictionaries we have, and that's where we go beyond what we did in the DFID dictionary. We also look at historic corpora, which when we closed work at the DFID 20 years ago, were not really, you didn't have this kind of OCR-based, very fine collection like the MDZ, those wonderful collections the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek has been doing. So in the past 2 or 3 years, we have been able to amend and correct and enlarge the information we have. So this is just to show you, and of course the lexicography in the different recipient target languages of the loan words has developed a lot, because when we started work, Ovid, the online this online dictionary of German, or the digitales Wörterbuch der deutschen Sprache, with a lot of drawing on a lot of historical corpora of German, didn't exist at all. So it was impossible to get a really accurate reconstruction of the word history, especially for German. It is strange. Historical lexicography was practically invented in Germany with Grimm's Wörterbuch. But then it is the Oxford English Dictionary and the different, the etymological different, the dictionary of French, Italian, and so on. So it is more other languages that have developed a sound, philologically sound and historically based lexicography, whereas as a colleague from Germanistik, a linguist from Germany once explained to me, it was after 1968 that everything historic and language history was somehow viewed with suspicion, and it is true that for many decades we have not had any systematic historical approach to the German language, so it was very difficult for us to get a date of first attestation, a citation, when a term came into use, and so on. The Duden didn't do that for a long time, and now, of course, we had some specialized etymological dictionaries, and now in the past years, we have also a wonderful documentation for German. By the way, also for legal terminology, there are some wonderful stuff. So just to finish this, well, there are words like acconto which are still in use, and the documentation is rather clear. But there are also cases, or addi, one of those terms defining a deadline for a payment. Auso, according to the usual deadline, has something to do with a wechsel, with a cambiale, check. Appalto, and here what I show you this only to make you see how we've been able to improve the data we have. For example, here we have been able to find an attestation from 1684, late 17th century, whereas before it was thought to be a word that had entered German usage only in 1728. So, and this is mainly due to these wonderful manuscripts and prints we have in the that the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek has put online, millions of documents and at a very high quality, so you can search them, and that really improves the kind of information we have. Or take valuta. There you have two uses in the domain of what we call economia, commercio, finanza, so trade, finance, and often they have also a legal, those words have a legal value, and it is in use in German as early as 1558, whereas in the current use, of course, it goes back to the specialized terminology of banking, of modern banking, and we still have it when we look at the bank account, valuta in the German bank. I would say it is the date, the deadline, the date when you a sum, a payment becomes, how do you say that, can be withdrawn. Okay, thank you for your attention. I know this was a very fast walk.
So thank you very much for this view in the database. That it has very much chances for the commercial legal history, especially for the MICOLL project, I would say. And it underlines the importance of the interdisciplinarity of our work. And thank you very much. So I open the floor for some questions now. We have a little time for that.
Should I use the microphone? Oh, sorry. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much for this extremely important lecture, because It's sort of the fundamentals of MICOLL and of other projects to reflect upon the connection between law and language. And I want to ask you about that. Now you are collecting the data and nothing beyond. And my notion from all your year-long work is are you daring to venture into the old notion of Jakob Grimm, Recht, Sprache und Literatur sind aus dem gleichen Bett aufgestanden. Law, literature and language have risen from the same bed. So is this just a coincidence, or could you, with your experience, although it's beyond your direct scope, say something about the likeliness that together with these long words, also the content is traveling from one country to another?
Thank you very much. Yes, that's an important question. I think definitely yes, we can do that. I mean, I showed some very rather simple cases, but even simple cases like accord show that many times the language draws from a common source, and there are many multiple etymologies. It's well, sometimes a new term is coined, and then it's easy. You can say, well, in 1558, we see this for the first time. It hasn't been. We have no prior attestation. But in other cases, it's the reuse of something that is already there that has in extra linguistic, for example, legal reality, a new value and a new use. And yes, I do think we can do that. I mean, this is just a database. Of course, we have. I should have shown you. We have also it's more than one database. One is the lexical database, where you can just research the which is quite a lot, and most of the work we have to do the loan words. But we also have a bibliographical database with not yet 2,000, but 1,800, 1,900 documents, articles, research articles, books, also historical studies, some from, of course, from legal history, from different domains, where those Italianisms occur and are researched. And of course, there's a line of tradition. We have also published articles based on what we see here, in order, for example, some things that Jake or Francesca have been doing, drawing on this lexicographical documentation in order to get a clearer picture of the actual use, and sometimes maybe even change in maybe even in jurisdiction. I couldn't say that. So yes, we're definitely doing that. But of course, yeah, our view is more that of the language historian and the linguist. And so what we do, we want to know about the mechanisms of adaptation, how the words integrate into the system of a recipient language, and especially semantic change. And it is semantic change that is especially interesting, I think, for the work done here.
So I think first you again.
Very quick follow-up, excuse me, please. Now, this is the assumption, of course, would be that a loan word replaces a lack in the receiving language. Something is new and has not yet been expressed. I also find the contrary when, for example, a Low German or an English text is translated into Latin, and there are concepts present for which the new language is not adapted. So, for example, in the Lex Mercatoria contract from Bristol, we find the word vrecum, which is of course not a Latin word, but an English or Germanic word which stays in the Latin language. So this is beyond your scope. That's not something that would
we're
interest
just looking
you.
at the Italian stuff, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're not looking. We have been thinking about including Latin because, of course, the more recent texts in Latin, it's not only the Latin of the antiquity, might have some Italianism, but as for now, we're just focusing on modern language still in use.
One question in between, may I allow? When you say that you are looking only at the Italian stuff, you focus also on, say, for example, German sources. I was wondering if you look at, for example, Alfred Schirmer, it's a lexica of the German Kaufmannsprache.
Yes, of course. We look at,
Okay,
even for
so
the defect, we had to, of course, because we had different, for the first version of this, we had Giovanni Rovere from Heidelberg and with Maurice Meyer, we had a German work unit, we had different units in different countries, because it would be a grave mistake to leave that out. Sometimes they're the only way we can document some stuff. Some things that you wouldn't even find in the Italian dictionary. Sometimes it looks Italian, but it has not been registered.
No, I was really fascinated by this cooperation between two different fields, because legal history is proposing since 1 century more or less this idea of jus commune, this idea of a sharing of a European legal culture. But this is always built from above, from droit savant and learned literature that goes around in Europe, and someone says, okay, there is some works that are known everywhere, but many other works are just known and used locally, right? So I think that now we are switching, we are going to the circulation of single argument, that is comparable to the circulation of single words. I make an example. Sarah joined us yesterday. She worked about the very case of the murder of Thomas Becket, 1170. Following this, lawyers started to create a new argument about the responsibility of the one who did not do the crime, but just spoke about the crime and influenced the fact that happened. This was a very local, contingent situation. Well, this very argument started to be used elsewhere. Started to be, and then went back to England, changed by different uses. Now, question is, how can you measure the influence of the context when you have a word that is borrowed elsewhere but used in a different linguistic context? So I think that this kind of database is built before the birth of artificial intelligence. So before machines that can evaluate the context, the large context of the use of words. Is now possible to see how a single word, let's think capitale, changes its meaning when you use it in the context of the German language.
Yes, it's true. Of course, this project started a long way before artificial intelligence could be used. Well, we might be able to use some of it. Of course, what we have, and those simple examples didn't visualize all these information. We now can include a whole small article about the Wortgeschichte, the word history, and it takes people who are really I look at the MICOLL people who are knowledgeable about the discipline. For example, I have one of my PhD students. She also has a diploma in musicology. She's a professional musician, and of course she's perfectly able to research all the semantic change of the musical terminology because she knows it from scratch. Or I've had another master thesis from a student who also was an art art history major, and she was able to, looking at especially German 16th and 17th century, maybe 17th, 18th century books and dictionaries on descriptions of Italian art history, she was able to find a lot of stuff that the traditional dictionaries did not have. And we can include all that, and we even have the links to the corpora. So if we find a word in one of the large corpora, we have a link, so you can trace the context. That is very, very important, because actually, yes, what traditional lexicography did was a great feat. It was very important, but it usually was just out of context. And we can do that now, and that is where I think it. And we can also have a link to a future MICOLL database or something, so we get the whole try and get the whole picture.
Giuseppe.
Grazie per la lezione. Una domanda che viene da Balanzella, genovese e tabacchino. Pensate di allargare questa indagine dell'OIM al Nord Africa? Perché in Tunisia ci sono molti italianismi e sarebbe un terreno ideale per fare una comparazione tra italianismi e francesismi, quindi perpetuando questa rivalità, diciamo, tra fratelli neolatini, perché numericamente la colonia italiana, cioè la presenza nella colonia francese degli italiani, è maggiore di quella francese per lungo tempo, è precedente, risale a parecchi secoli prima, prende sia il campo della pesca che dell'agricoltura, della cultura. Il primo giornale è un giornale italiano, della medicina l'ospedale italiano, della scuola, le scuole sono prima italiane, e sarebbe interessante vedere come nel mondo arabo queste due lingue neolatine entrano anche nel commercio.
Rispondo in italiano, in English, but rather in English. Thank you very much. Well, yes, I have not been able to show all the work groups. We have Guido Cifoletti, I think, is the one who's working on Arabic. I should have explained, but the time was not. This is a project going back years, and what it draws on is two sources: the Dizionario di Italianismi e Francesi Inglesi Tedesco, which was one project hosted by the and promoted by the Accademia Crusca, but also a larger project which Luca Seriani had started more than 20 years ago, on Italianisms in 80 languages, of the famous Censimento degli Italianismi, which was never published. UTET should have published that. And so we could draw on many of those materials if the experts in most cases, the experts would agree to working with us or giving us their data. And then we have one scholar, Guido Cifoletti, then we have as a consultant Emanuele Banfi, who knows a lot about the Mediterranean, Italian presence in the Mediterranean. And yes, of course, the colonial presence, not only in Northern Africa, Tunisia, Egyptian, Arabic has a lot of loanwords from Italian, so and sometimes even in the written language and the legal specialized terminology and so on. So it's really interesting, but it depends on whether we have people, because we have every week or every second week someone emails me, says, you're the director of this project, and I have collected some Italian in Vietnamese, which is very interesting, but of course we have to see whether the materials are really, because we need a lot of time to get them ready for the database. But yes, thank you.
So,
just very briefly.
Very briefly?
Yeah, super briefly. But I have to say something because, okay, this is really at the core of my project. So I'm very grateful that you are here today, Matthias, And during these years, really, okay. Okay, thank you very much for being here today. And I mean, at the core of MICOLL, there is this relationship between law and language. So we are developing our lexicon of commercial law, historical lexicon of commercial law, through those kind of databases, adding our case studies. So this collaboration is very, very important. Guido Cipoletti was now evoked, who is the author of this book about the lingua franca barbaresca, which was for me one of the first things I thought about, the idea of a lingua franca of merchants, which is apparently a myth, as is the Lex Mercatoria. So this is another parallel, and so it's also very important for my project. But I wanted just to ask something about the map, because I didn't know about this, so I missed something, because this is also a very important part of MICOLL. So showing, visualizing on a map the migration, these loans, etc., those calcs, and we are working on this. I just wanted to know, this is something that you are developing, so you have to work on it, or it's kind of automatic, because you know, when you put the name of a city, then you have the geographical references. Is there a person doing this in particular? Because, okay, we are going to talk about this later, but it's quite important, and I just wanted to know a bit about this.
Just very briefly.
Yeah.
This is a demo version I created in the beginning. I had someone working for me doing it. It's just for the 248 terms from dialectal origin, where you could really trace some kind of migration path, and it's a simple program I set up, and it's still online. If you have the link, you can still see it, and it's a small database. You get some information from based on the details. But of course, we entered all the geographical of dialectal origin in order to be able to extract automatically all the stuff and visualize it on a map. So we have all the data in the database, but we haven't yet created a nice map with all the stuff. And I think artificial intelligence could speed up the process and help a little bit.
I think we have to talk about this.
And I call it OI map very simply, because it's OIM, map, and I published a small article on 2021.
So thank you very much to you again, and thank you very much for the discussion. Now we are changing to the next speaker in this first section of today. While you are taking place, I would like to introduce to you Bettina Pfotenhauer. She studied history and English languages and literature in Berlin, Dublin, and Munich, and then she graduated with the first state exam in Munich in 2009. In 2014, she obtained her PhD in medieval history at the University at Munich, which was published under the title Nürnberg und Venedig im Austausch, Menschen, Güter und Wissen an der Wende vom Mittelalter zur Neuzeit. Bettina Pfotenhauer can now certainly be described as Venetian by adoption, not only as she was a research fellow here at the Centro Tedesco in 2011 and 12 and 2014, as far as I could see. This was followed by an archival traineeship at the Bavarian School of Archival Studies, and subsequently a position as an archivist in Munich, there in the city archives, and since 2024 she is member of the MICOLL project team. Her research interests main concern to the economic, cultural, social relations between Italy and Germany in the late Middle Ages and modern times, cultural transfer and provenance research, and so on. Today, Bettina Pfotenhauer will be speaking to us about normativity and Europeanization in business language acquisition. Mehr Italienisch dann Französisch. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you also, Matthias Heinz, for this wonderful very interesting presentation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened before, let's put it like that. In the spring of 1546, the young Nuremberg merchant Daniel Tucher arrived in Lyon to continue his apprenticeship in France following the initial period of learning in Milan. There, he was sent to work for Rzburg, a merchant originally from Lucca. In addition to business skills and commercial procedures, Daniel should also improve his language skills. Daniel's father, Lienhard, which you can see in the famous Tucherbuch, and he who was at that time the head of one of the most important Upper German, so Southern German, so Oberdeutsche merchant families. Lienhard Tucher hoped that his son would learn to speak beide Sprachen, as you can see here, so both languages. However, he was aware that Daniel would probably learn mehr Italianisch than Frentzheysch from his Italian master. And indeed, in a letter to his father just a year later, Daniel had to report that he could not learn well the French language. Die Französische Sprache nicht wohl lernen können. He would do so as soon as he moved to the Tucher's trading post in Lyon. He tried, however, to avoid contact with other Germans and to use his mother tongue, as this would hinder him from learning other languages. Das ist gewisslich wahr, wenn ich viel Deutsch reden will, so würde ich kein Sprachrecht wohl lernen können. It is certainly true that if I were to speak much German, I would not be able to learn any language properly. Learning several languages was a key part of the training for young merchants. Fluency in multiple languages was a central requirement for the day-to-day business of Upper German merchants operating internationally in the early modern period. And here you can see the two main cities, as you know, Nuremberg and Augsburg, and the Lieberkonikarum by Hartmann Schädel. Particularly in their younger years, the merchants traveled extensively between European trading centers, mainly in Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. Furthermore, the merchants' multilingualism was a vital element of their correspondence. The ability to compose letters in foreign languages was considered good form in communication with foreign business partners already in early times. The Venetian Armadi and the Nuremberg press were writing to one another in Italian as early as 1400, and for the Augsburg Welser and the Florentine Salviati and Lanfredini, this was a matter of course at the beginning of the 16th century. Yet, the letters between Lienhard and Daniel Tucher do not only demonstrate the importance of multilingualism, they also raise key questions regarding education and language acquisition within the context of European merchant cultures in general. There is to ask about the settings and places of mercantile education, its circumstances, and the priorities in terms of its contents. The letters also highlight the significance of Italian, whether in terms of language, commercial techniques, concepts, ideas, everything, and the impact in the German-speaking areas. At the same time, the focus turns to the media of commercial interaction and education, their function, and obviously from our perspective today, also their value as a historical source. And finally, the episode concerning Daniel Tucher's language skills raises key questions regarding the extent of a shared European commercial culture and the Europeanization of trade in economic, linguistic, and legal terms. From the turn of the 16th century onwards, the geographical scope of commercial training widened according to the general expansion of trade. It increasingly extended from Italy to Western Europe and from the Iberian Peninsula to the East, depending always, of course, on the focus of the respective trading company. Italy, however, as it had been the whole Middle Ages long, remained the center of commercial education. This was particularly true for the important upper merchant families, such, for example, the Tuchers, the Beheim, the Imhoff of Nuremberg, or the famous Fugger and Welser of Augsburg. Even in Lisbon, as Michael IV Beheim urged his relative Wolfgang in 1507, one learned to conduct business in the same way as it was done in Venice. Quote, zu Venedig gehalten. Thus, the Italian education as basis of mercantile training held central importance even outside Italy. The focus of this apprenticeship abroad was on foreign business practices and commercial traditions, which were always accompanied by the acquisition of the underlying language and its economic terminology. Already when choosing instructors, preference was often given, if possible, to merchant friends, to business partners, other friendly merchant families. Thus, as early as the 1420s, an educational exchange took place between the Amadi and Kress families, in which Friedrich III Kress went to Venice, whilst Amado Amadi spent several years of learning in Nuremberg. And here you can see again in the Libertonicum the main educational places for the merchants from Upper Germany, Venice, Florence, and Lyon. Anton Welser of Augsburg declared himself obligato per sempre to Lanfredido Lanfredini when the latter took Welser's son as an apprentice in Florence in 1509. In Lyon and the Nuremberg families, in Lyon, the Nuremberg families Tucher and Imhoff, who had always had their main focus for a long time in Italy, but at the end of the 15th century but increasingly also traded to France. In Lyon, they had contacts primarily with the Lucca-based company of Cenami Parenzi and San Miniati, and consequently, the Nuremberg merchants sent their sons there to save apprenticeship. The circumstances of the education can be traced particularly well in the correspondence of the Tucher family of Nuremberg, which provides a very detailed documentation. I just give you some information on that because that's a really amazing basis for research. Nearly 1,800 letters survived, of which around 400 originated from Lyon, where the trading family had maintained a trading post to Faktorei as early as the end of the 15th century. As was the case with Daniel Tucher or his cousin Hieronymus, who trained with Urbano Parenzi around 1519, so also Urbano Parenzi, of course, from Lucca, the first stage of training for the sons of prominent merchant families and numerous other Upper German merchants was, even in France, an Italian trading house. Only in a second stage, they were sent to French merchants or joined the family's own local trading posts. And we have hints that we have similar mechanisms in other trading cities, like, for example, at Krakow, where the Upper German merchants, and this time it's the Beheim, who had a very close connection to Krakow, and also there the merchants from Upper Germany learned Italian before they learned the local language, in that case Polish. The general contents of the merchant's education will be touched upon briefly, because most of them you already know very well. The importance of commercial techniques and foreign trading customs are very well known. In addition, apprentices were trained in letter writing in the instructor's offices, so the Schreibstube, and naturally, of course, also in other languages, and if necessary, also in the corresponding scripture. That's particularly mentioned if they have to write also another scripture. Great importance was attached to the social and moral education of the young merchants. This took place both within the local context and within the personal and communicative networks that spanned the distance between home and the place of training. And those networks equally serve to convey social expectations and to monitor compliance with them. As early as the 15th century, training instructions can be found that urge an irreproachable way of life and a behavior generating good faith. And we talked about that later concerning bankruptcy, how important is the aspect of good faith. Whether in these training instructions or in letters between sons and fathers, trainers and trainees, again and again, there are demands for piety and for avoiding gambling, prostitutes, or other bad corrupting company, Pose für führerische Gesellschaft, and to avoid, especially also, which is mentioned very often, the excessive consumption of wine. The merchant's good reputation, so the Leumund, which is a little bit more than reputation, was a crucial form of social capital for the successful business trading and for the overall reputation and standing of the entire trading company. Therefore, it was so important. The Tucher letters contain numerous insistent indications regarding the expectation of fathers and masters, as well as submissive assurances from the apprentices that they would follow the moral instructions. However, as you can imagine, this was often not the case. Close monitoring through letters which were sent from trainers, relatives, or business partners at the place of training to the associates, fathers, and masters back home were necessary. Admonitions and threats of sanctions from the letter are equally frequent. If everything evolved to the master's satisfaction, a brief reminder was sufficient. Thus, in 1433, Antonio de Nobili of Florence wrote to his Nürnberg protégé Paulus I Beheim in Krakau Mörli, sei fromm und lerne flugs. Be pious and learn quickly. Especially when it came to learning foreign languages, apprentices were expected to show particular commitment. In 1544, Daniel Tucher wrote to his father from Milan, assuring him, Lieber Herr Vater, wisst, dass ich all mein Fleiß will tun, dass ich die Sprache bald will lernen, dass ihr kein Mangel an mir soll haben. The process of acquiring foreign languages was similar to today. Hieronymus Tucher described the procedure to his grandfather Anthony as early as 1520. First, he would learn to read French, after which he would be able to speak it better. Only then writing would be regarded. Ich soll und will das Französischsprach lernen lesen, daraus mag folgen, dass ich des der Pass mag begriffen zu reden und danach mag ich das Schreiben auch lernen, damit hoffe ich kein Fleiß zu sparen. Also in terms of content, the learning strategies were similar to today's language teaching. This is particularly evident in Georg of Nürnberg's German-Italian textbook, Sprachlehrbuch, which was compiled in Venice in 1424. Alongside vocabulary and verb lists, it contains also dialogues to help consolidate learning. Everyday words are accompanied by technical terminology and cultural information that is still valid today. Also this Sunday, hundreds of Venetians, among them myself, will flock to the Lido. Domenico e voglio di andare al Lido per mio piacere. Even some 200 years later, after George, an Italian-German glossary compiled by Lucas Friedrich Beheim of Nuremberg during his educational journey, so Bildungsreise to Florence, even that glossary contains a similar variety of terms regarding a wide range of areas of life from the seasons of the year, cambio, translated as wechsel or change, or Florentine proverbs. Language learners are still advised today of what the younger Upper Germans in Lyon already knew in the 16th century, that one learns a foreign language better if one speaks as little as possible in its own language. Success in language acquisition varied greatly, however. Daniel Tucher left Milan in 1545 without having really learned Italian. Although he understood the language, he could not speak it well. According to him, the same was true for numerous other German merchants there. And we always, of course, have to ask ourselves if that's really true or if that was just a good excuse why he himself didn't learn it properly. When he arrived in Lyon to stay, his letters show, however, that despite his lack of fluency, he had developed a feeling for the language. When he arrived in Lyon to stay with Cenami, who was from Lucca, he was well aware of the difference between the Milanese and Lucchese dialects. On several occasions, he remarked that he preferred the latter, and he was not the only one to make similar observations. Thanks to the vividness of his letters, the young Tucher is a striking, yet merely one of many examples of how Upper German merchants in Western Europe often first completed an Italian education before learning French language and French commercial traditions. The great significance of Italian merchant culture for Upper German traders remained unbroken in the early modern period and also in Western Europe, despite general geographic shifts in European trade. The relevance is also evident in the history of the German language terms examined by MICOLL. Without any intent to anticipate the detailed explanation of my colleagues later on, allow me to make some comments on this. As significant connections arise with the process of learning acquisition as well as the geographical and social heterogeneity of merchant culture. Again, the Tuchers of Nuremberg make a prominent appearance here. Whilst it was previously assumed that the term bankruptcy first appeared in Low German and therefore in the German language-speaking areas in 1530, in fact, it can be traced 2 years earlier as Pankenrotten in a letter from Linhard Rottengatter in Antwerp to Linhard Tucher. 4 years later, Vincent Perkheimer reported again to Linhard Tucher, but this time from Lyon and in a hybrid derivation from French and Italian, that the young Johann Fors-Perrier had gone bancarotta. And in 1547, the Italian derivation bancarotta appears for the first time in the German-speaking areas, again in the Tucher letters. It is not only striking that the terms are all found in a Nuremberg Western Europe context. Also, the question of the term's French-Italian origin arises anew in the context of the research on trading processes of Upper Germans in Western Europe trading centers. Furthermore, one sees that for the Tuchers, the word bankrott also seems to have been the main term for corresponding economic and legal event. The word falliment, and there's no indication in the German, I couldn't find any indication in German letters so far that we have a differentiation between fallimento e bancarotta, falliment, bankrott, in terms of content, at least not during that time. The word falliment appears only once in the Tucher's correspondence in 1561. This is remarkable since the general situation otherwise is entirely different in Upper Germany. The term bankrott is the absolute exception in the major southern German trading cities. It only appears with the Beham family in 1564 and the Fugger family in Augsburg in 1575. The term falliment, both as noun, for example, as fallimento, fallita, fallido, or as verb like as verlieren mainly, was far more common in the second half of the 16th century. It was particularly widespread in Augsburg, a fact reflected in the three corresponding imperial city statutes, the so-called Fallitenordnungen of 1564, 74, and 80. The choice of words did therefore depend on geographical factors as well as on family and business networks. The Tuchers also have a special role in the history of the German language regarding the term Compagnia. Like the other Upper German families which were part of the research, also the Tucher used the different German expressions like Gesellschaft or Handel. However, their frequent use of the term Compagnia is unique, not least because of how commonplace it was for them. I couldn't find, well, there are sayings that the trading company of the Tucher called themselves Tucherisch Compagnia. I couldn't find any proofs for that. But the word Compagnia is repeatedly used as synonym for Gesellschaft, and in particular it's found almost exclusively in reference to the frequently mentioned Gesellschaftsbriefe, so the business letters. And here often the Italian part of the word Compagnia brief is abbreviated in different variants, as you can see here. And this way of abbreviation suggests that there was quite a huge familiarity with the word. In the case of other major Nuremberg trading houses, for example Beheim and Imhoff, the use of the term Compagnia is, by contrast, an exception. They tend to use the German word Gesellschaft, which is also found exclusively in the Fugger German language letter. So the Fugger don't use the word Compagnia. And the expression societas can be only found in Latin text. So that's nothing which is different. A similar prevalence of the German word is evident regarding the terms cambio, cambiale, wechsel. As bills of exchange appear extremely frequently in the sources, of course only samples could be made. Those reports reveal that the German expressions appears in a wide variety of forms and spellings, mainly written with X. Compound nouns, such as the Wechselbrief or the Wechselläuf, and compound verbs, such as the Wechselmachen, can be found frequently. The appearance of the Italian form has been only traced in the Fugger family's record so far. In the letter books of the Augsburg family, the term cambio appears in different forms, such as cambiato, or in the plural forms cambi, cambios. Perhaps there's even some Spanish connection to that, because the Fugger had a very important trade with Spain, as we all know. The fact that cambio and Wechsel, or Wechselbrief, were used synonymously is demonstrated by the combination prima Wechselbrieflein from 1594 instead of the otherwise standard pairing prima de cambio. Unfortunately, the greater part of the letter collections from Fugger is from the late 16th century, so it remains unclear if they used the term already before or not. Similarly, Italianized forms for the legal term and concept of insurance appear only in the Fugger correspondence, and therefore quite late. However, in general, assicurazione, is the noun assiguration, and the past participle assicuriert are very, very rare. So these are the only samples I could find in the whole research. And interestingly, it's also another synonym for Versicherung is also Hypotheca, which, is of course also derives from Italian, but actually in our sense has another meaning nowadays. So the history of MICOLL terms shows, therefore, that the adoption of Italian terminology and its use in Upper Germany was certainly common, even if there are clear differences. A user to write not only geographically, but even between individual families. The linguistic identities and entities evident here were quite fragmented. It also becomes clear that commercial correspondence are a very rich source of information for the language, for the historic language. As almost no other source, historical record, as almost no other historical record, these letters provide a direct insight into the reality of commercial life. The preservation of extensive letter collections from the most important Upper German merchant families, including the correspondence of the Fugger family, the Tucher, the Beheim, and the Imhoff, provide a sound basis for relevant conclusions. But also for contemporaries, letters served a variety of purposes. Within commercial education, they were means of communication, learning tools, media for the diffusion of knowledge, and instruments of regulation and control. Thus, the letters, often written on a daily basis, served the communication with the hometowns, to convey business and personal news, but also to provide reports on the apprenticeship itself and to issue instructions to the apprentices. Social and communication networks developed, ensuring a constant and mutual connection between home and abroad. In this context, too, the letters additionally functioned as media of learning. Whilst learning to write letters was itself an important element of training, the letters sent home could also serve as an evidence of learning progress, willingness to learn, and academic achievement. It was not uncommon, for example, to write letters in Italian in order to demonstrate to the ones at home what the young apprentice, in this case Hieronymus Tucher in 1580, from Lyon, not from Italy, but from Lyon, was learning every day. Damit, dass ihr seht, was ich schreibe. Also, the diffusion of the knowledge acquired, such as Italian or Italianized terms, frequently took place by a commercial correspondence. Furthermore, the monitoring and regulatory role of letters was of great significance. This did not apply only to the content of practical training. The letters played a central role in controlling the social behavior of young merchants, ensuring compliance with social and legal norms, and ensuring the merchant's good reputation. Thus, they laid the foundations for the establishment and consolidation of binding standards of conduct applicable across borders, as well as for uniform normative social concepts within European merchant cultures. As a result, the correspondences also took on an important normative function. Through the letters and the intensity of their exchange, a European convergence emerged that not only in communicative and economic terms, but also in social, cultural, linguistic, and normative respects. The processes and contents of language acquisition, as well as the diffusion and migration of terminology and concepts, demonstrate just how fluid geographical and linguistic boundaries were in Europe during the early modern period. Contemporary economic and legal concepts and the associated mental frameworks overcame geographical boundaries and reflected the complex interplay of European markets and merchant cultures. The historical linguistic development of the terms examined by MICOLL reveals not only cultural and linguistic networks, but also the flexibility of borders and geographical, social, and cultural entities. What becomes apparent is a fundamental Europeanization of commercial trade, despite differences and peculiarities of course determined by geographical, political, and historical factors. At the same time, the development reveals that since the beginning of the 15th and especially during the 16th century, a Europeanization of learning and education took place, which, well, might be called a learning revolution, or is exactly not. And this Europeanization went along with the geographical expansion of markets and trade activities in Europe and overseas, and served to reinforce them at the same time. But nevertheless, traditional elements of mercantile culture remain fundamental and its Italianità unchallenged. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina, for this really rich lecture, and that showed us the value of these letters as a source. So thank you very much. And now the floor is open for some questions. Yeah.
Thank you so very much. That was extremely fascinating. A question about versichern, perché dicevi che assicurare si trova anche come ipoteca in italiano, e infatti io l'ho trovato molto spesso e ha un senso, assicuro, come dire, la mia posizione creditoria in questo modo. Infatti non si trova mai con pegno, perché poi il pegno invece lo do a te e allora non assicuro la mia posizione. E si trova lo stesso anche in tedesco, cioè versichern qualcosa non con un Versicherung, con un'assicurazione, ma metto in salvo, rafforzo la mia posizione, che è il senso di questo modo di intendere l'assicurare se stessi.
Sì. Ich versichere mich mir selbst, ich versichere. Allora, versicherung alla fine in tedesco è, allora io non sono linguista, quindi allora se qualcuno
No, ma chiedo scusa, la mia domanda era, mi sono espresso male, intendevo dire quando si trova in queste fonti, in questo periodo, versichern, si può anche intendere ipoteca, così come si trova in italiano assicurare?
Sì, allora direi di sì, però sinceramente io ho trovato proprio che era usato, allora provo di tornare qua un attimo, che era usato proprio come sinonimo solo una volta da Fugger. Quindi si trova la parola ipoteca anche prima e anche dopo e anche in altre lettere. E sinceramente io pensavo sempre che comunque deve significare Versicherung, però non c'è, come si dice, non c'è un proof, no? Non è così che posso proprio sapere di sicurezza che, perché nelle lettere, allora queste lettere dei Fugger sono più i libri di lettere, quindi sono sempre solo, non sono proprio lettere come quelli di Tucher che abbiamo proprio una lettera all'altra, però sono piccoli abstract che vogliono fare capire di cosa si scriveva. Quindi non è proprio spiegato bene cosa potrebbe significare. E ho solo trovato una volta che erano proprio come in questo modo usato come ipoteca o Versicherung, che è proprio scritto, che sono due parole che sono proprio anche in questo fonte direttamente uno vicino all'altro.
Also, solo, I can just give you what we have in our databases as Assecuration from 1543, and then we have Assecuranz 1554, and we have Assekurieren before that 1554 still, and the sense would be, but it's just like Versicherung. It's assicurazione, garanzia, fideiussione.
So could you give please the micro to... Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much as a historian of the Italian language. So I have a couple of questions. The first one, I was really impressed by the perception of the different vernaculars by German merchants, because this is not what is generally said in bibliography. I mean, the communis opinion is that foreigners did not have a real perception of the geolinguistic variety of Italian. And there is a famous, well-known article by Seriani on Grand Tour Travelers, so a little later, 18th, 19th century, and where he claims that, foreigners like Goethe, for instance, knew that there were different dialects, but still they spoke Italian, Tuscan Italian, and they could be understood by everybody. So it was really amazing that, in 16th century, you could tell Milanese from Lucchese and say, this is not the same language and it is more difficult. And so that's what, the first question is, how many of these testimonies have you found in your corpus? And the second one is on the aesthetic judgment, of course, because he says, es sei kein schöne Sprache zu Mailand, so it is not beautiful language, which again is in contradiction with the stereotype of, Italian as a beautiful language, and which is, of course, a stereotype you find in literature, you find in music, but you do not see it in mercantile correspondence, and so I just wanted to know if you find aesthetic judgment like this on other varieties of Italian, or is this only the only case you have found? Thank you.
Well, actually, on Italian, I think we have different, we have similar things on Venetian and other letters earlier, that people have difficulties to understand Venetian, as it is nowadays as well. So then we have also Germans realize that there's some difference between Venetian and the Italian they know. In the Tuchel letters we also find it for French, that for example someone is going to Avignon and says, well, I don't like the dialect here. And in Lyon, they have a much nicer French. About this episode about Daniel Tucha, it might also be influenced by his own perception of his stay in Milan, because he wasn't happy in Milan. It seems that he had problems with his master, and it might be that this very personal or this very clear statement that he didn't like the Milanese dialect also might be connected to that. That it's also his personal experience who's influenced by that. But yes, we find every now and then it's not very frequent, but they occur, and also for different dialects and also in different languages. Yeah.
So I would like to close the floor. I see you, then Albrecht, and Anna Maria, and then I would like to close. Thank you very much. And please, short.
I also find this internal differentiation and perception of the dialectal variety very interesting, but I think in this case he's citing an auto stereotype. He says, es sei kein schöne Sprach zu Mailand. They call it not a very, so it seems, if that is true, of course it can be a way of himself saying, I don't like this dialect so much, but it's also a very early document of auto-perception of being different. It's not Tuscan, it's not the La Bella Lingua, so that's quite interesting. And you cited Avignon, of course. Yes, well, they had very naive ideas of the variation in language, because what people would have spoken is Occitan. They wouldn't have spoken French in Avignon at the time, only written language.
So could you please give the microphone to Anna Maria? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. Yes, I was wondering, when you find for example, Wechsel or Cambio, have you the impression that this is also a legal qualification of something which carries not only the Italian or the German or name, but also something else? They use the term in the original language to refer to a legal content. I don't know, you might have said this during your presentation, but I would like to, if you, thank you.
I think my colleagues are going to speak about that.
Okay, wonderful,
So,
thank you very much.
I think they will go to answer that. Yeah, of course. Just to do it very quickly.
So, thank you very much to you, Bettina, again. Thank you very much for the audience, for the interesting questions. And now, yes, we are running a little late. I would suggest that we shorten the coffee break to 20 minutes, not from 30 to 20 minutes. Stefania is not there, so I decide we meet us at 11:40 again here. Thank you.